Okay, thank you very much. So I know everybody is eager for lunch. It's a pre-lunch talk. I will not take much of your time. I will take maximum 20 minutes. So I'm going to discuss another very devastating neurological disease, which is called subarachnoid hemorrhage. This disease was described a long time back because Hippocrates described this in his writing in aphorism that almost 2500 years back, that when a person with good health are suddenly seized with pains in the head and straightway are laid down speechless and bathed with stertor, they die in 7 days unless fever come on. So we are now able to understand the pathophysiology of this disease, but he nicely described this vasospasm theory in 2500 years back. So to put the things in perspective, the SAH is associated with very high mortality and morbidity. Okay, as you know, the 12% of the patient actually they don't reach the hospital. They die because of sudden rise in the intracranial pressure. Almost 25% of the patients who reach the hospital, they died in the hospital. Those who survive, almost 50% of them have a significant neurological morbidity and cognitive impairment at 1 year. So as you can see the magnitude of this problem, we need to identify this disease early and treat early. So why this so much high morbidity and mortality is associated with SAH? One of the most important reason is that many times people miss the diagnosis. Sometimes patient have a very mild headache, it's called sentinel headache, or a patient had initial headache and patient was absolutely fine after that. And that is the reason many times patient actually they don't seek help. And this may delay the diagnosis of the subarachnoid hemorrhage. Another thing is the delay in aneurysmal repair. As we know that many of the centers are not equipped to manage these types of patients. Ideally, these patients should go to a center where there is a high volume of cases comes. Like the centers should treat at least 60 cases per year. Then only ideally these patients, they are designated as management of subarachnoid hemorrhage centers, right? So another thing is delayed aneurysmal repair. Then third will be the complication of SAH. As we know that this disease associated with lots of neurological as well as extra-neurological complications that we are going to discuss. And infection, any condition which requires a prolonged hospitalization is complicated by infection with MDR bugs and which significantly increase the mortality and morbidity. Okay, so how do we approach these types of patient? The most important thing is the urgent early diagnosis and assessment of the severity, right? Then the next step will be the etiology, the workup, whether this is an aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage or it's a non-aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, because the management vastly is different between these two conditions. Then we need to do the early aneurysmal repair as early, that means within 72 hours. Ideally, it should be as early as possible, but not beyond 72 hours. Okay, that decreases the incidence of rebleeding. Okay, then we need to anticipate and treat complication. For that, very close neurological monitoring in a neurointensive care unit is required. But despite of everything, the patient can have a significant turbulent course in the next in 2-3 weeks. So these patients are very sick. So this was a 55-year-old man. He was diabetic and a smoker, and he was hypertensive. He presented and he complained of a headache which was extremely severe, and he described that as worst headache of his life. This is what the description is for the headache most of the time. On arrival to emergency, he was opening eyes on verbal commands and he appears oriented. So the patient's symptoms are typically consistent with the SAH. And this symptom, as we told you, that they normally complain that they are the worst headache, this is the worst headache of his life, and it is usually associated with photophobia, nausea and vomiting because of the presence of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Many times patient can present with a sudden loss of consciousness, and this patient's GCS was protected, so the airway was protected. So what are the risk factors? As you can see in this patient itself, the smoking and tobacco abuse are very common thing. Hypertension is one of the most important risk factors. As the age increases more than 50 years, the chances of subarachnoid hemorrhage increases. Alcohol abuse is also a very important risk factor. So disease is slightly more common in the female patients, and the drugs like sympathomimetics like cocaine can increase the incidence of SAH. Those patients who develop an SAH, the family members, especially the siblings, they have chances of 4 to 5 times high incidence of SAH in those patients. So coming to the size of the aneurysm, the aneurysm are divided on the basis of the diameter. So those aneurysm which has a diameter of more than 7, they are considered as a medium to large, and they are of more significant. A smaller aneurysm are 2 to 7 millimeters. The site of the aneurysm is also important, not for exactly for us, but for neurointerventionists and the surgeons, because they need to decide the plan the management of aneurysm on the basis of the site also. So the distal ICA and its junction, the posterior communicating artery junction, which is the most common site, and these are the other common sites. The middle cerebral artery is 20%, and the posterior circulation for vertebrovascular only 4% same. Okay, so the investigation, anyway, the non-contrast CT scan is an investigation of the choice. Any patient who comes with the symptoms, she should ideally undergo the CT scan. The CT scan has a very good sensitivity and specificity, but mainly sensitivity for the diagnosis of SAH, early SAH. So patient who comes within 6 to 12 hours, almost 100% sensitivity of CT is seen. But once the patient, this time is more than 12 hours, so sensitivity decreases. So by the 3 days, usually the sensitivity of the CT comes down to 90%. And by the day 5, the sensitivity comes down to 50%. So if the patient comes after 5 days, 1 of 2 patients out of 2, you can miss the diagnosis. So if you have a strong suspicion of SAH and your CT is negative, then ideally this patient should undergo a lumbar puncture. So what you are going to see in the CT, the presence of subarachnoid blood, perimesencephalic, and cisterns, and in the fissures also, as you can see the blood. This is a classical picture of SAH. So initial CT is normal, and you have a strong suspicion. These patients should ideally undergo a lumbar puncture. So lumbar puncture, what you are going to see, you can see the elevated opening pressure because of the presence of raised ICP, and elevated RBC count that does not diminish from T1 to 4. So that basically differentiates it from the traumatic traumatic tap. So this may be the finding. The third will be the xanthochromia. What is xanthochromia? Is basically a pink or yellowish tinge of the CSF. This condition is basically seen because of the hemoglobin which is present, it degrades after 2 hours. So presence of this blood, the presence of xanthochromia means that at least this hemorrhage was there for 2 hours minimum. Right? And it persists for a longer duration of the time than compared to CT. So if the xanthochromia is present and you have a clinical suspicion that this patient has SAH. But this condition, xanthochromia, is not specific for SAH. This can be seen in other conditions, like if the patient has a very high protein count, or the bilirubin level is high, or a very severe traumatic tap, you can get xanthochromia. Any other investigation? MRI is usually not the routine part of the management of these patients, but if you have a strong suspicion and the CT is not contributory, you can do an MRI. The advantage with the MRI is that you can get a small aneurysm, like 2 to 5 millimeter aneurysm can be identified with the MRI. Okay, so what's the next step? This is a diagnostic pathway that we need to do. Whenever you suspect SAH, you do a CT scan. If the CT scan is positive, ideally these patients should undergo a perfusion CT or an CT angiography in the same setting, right? And in most of the time, you can get the subarachnoid hemorrhage, even the presence of the vasospasm, even the size of the aneurysm, almost in 77 to 100% time you can get these findings. Most of the time, though, you don't need to do a DSA if the aneurysm is big, right? And then on the basis of this angiosity only, we can decide the treatment, whether this patient will go for the clipping or coiling. If the CT angio is not contributory, then ideally this patient should go for a DSA, and after the DSA, the treatment modality will be decided. Okay, so the next, we have already discussed that the etiology determination is also important. For that, patient has to undergo a DSA or the CT MRI. A small aneurysm can be identified with the MRI. It's also important to understand the aneurysm, the nature of the aneurysm, because those aneurysms which are more than 7 millimeter, they have a tendency of rebleeding, right? And if the neck size is big, or the size of the aneurysm is big as compared to the vessel size, these type of the aneurysm, they rebleed very commonly in the next 24 to 48 hours. So we need to keep this in mind. So is there any severity grading scales are available? Everybody knows that there are clinical severity grade, which is Hunt and Hess, and World Federation of Neurosurgeons, WFNC. So Hunt and Hess is basically divides clinical on the basis of clinical ground from grade 1 to grade 5. In the grade 1, the patient is asymptomatic. Grade 4, patient is osteoporosis or severe hemiparesis, and grade 5 patient has a severe coma or disabled posturing. So any grade which is grade 4 and 5 is considered as poor grade SH. So WFNC classification, this is the most common classification that's being used nowadays, and that basically grades it on the basis of GCS and the motor deficit. So the grade 4 and 5 are considered as poor grade SH. So another grading which is based on the CT scanning, and that is called Fisher or modified Fisher. Previously the Fisher scale was used, but there was a fallacy with this, that in grade 4's mortality was lower than grade 3, and that's why this is Klassen modified it into modified Fisher scale, and that is basically presence of SH with presence of IVH, intraventricular hemorrhage. And then it's this, so the mortality in the grade 4 is almost 40%, and mortality in grade 1 is about 24%. So coming to the management, there is a routine management. As you know, the airway is very important, and this patient, initial GCS is less than 8. Ideally, these patients should be intubated, and that also help in reducing the ICP. Then a very close neurological and monitoring and hemodynamic monitoring is important, because these patients should ideally go to a neurocritical care unit and they should be managed there. If the patient is conscious, try to keep the patient comfortable. Patient should be in the bed rest. You should give a laxative to these patients. They should not strain, because all these things can increase ICP. All these things can cause rupture of the aneurysm. Right? The stress ulcer prophylaxis is important. Then treatment of the fever is important, as we know that increase in the fever is associated with poor outcome in this patient. The treatment of anemia is also very important. It's a very controversial topic for the SAH, because as you know, the critically ill patient, the 7 is a trigger, but in these patients, experts say try to keep it between 8 to 10 gram%. Although this is not based on very strong studies, especially those patients who has a poor grade SAH, grade 4 and 5, they should have slightly higher hemoglobin. The glycemic control, like any critical illness, you should try to avoid hyperglycemia and try to keep it less than 180 milligram. Okay, so what are the non-neurological complications? The non-neurological complication is, there are a lot of non-neurological complications are seen. In fact, this disease, SAH, is called the pancreatitis of the nervous system. So you can get lots of non-neurological symptoms. They are mainly caused because of the excessive sympathetic stimulation and from catecholamine surge simultaneously because of the presence of systemic inflammatory response syndrome. So you can have a neurocardiac injuries, you have renal injury, you have hyperglycemia, other metabolic abnormalities. Okay, so patient can have plenty of the ECG changes without actually having any problem with the heart, and these are the ECG changes which are commonly seen, right? Patient can also have a Takotsubo type cardiomyopathy, myocardial stunning, increase in the cardiac enzymes, and but these things are very common in the first 24 to 48 hours. The neurogenic pulmonary edema is also seen. It's also very common. Almost the incidence is 20 to 30%. So why this happens? Because of the presence of subarachnoid blood, there is excessive catecholamine surge. It can affect both alpha receptor as well as beta receptor. Because of presence of beta receptor, it can cause myocardial band necrosis and cardiopulmonary impairment. And because of excessive alpha stimulation, increase in the PA pressure, it can cause endothelial damage, can cause increase in the capillary permeability. Patient have a neurogenic pulmonary edema. So fluid management is also a very important part. Previously, you should try to keep this patient euvolemic, hypervolemic. There's a high chances of vasospasm. Hypervolemia is totally avoided. So you need to make sure that your patient is euvolemic. Try to give isotonic fluid to these patients. Right? The hyponatremia and hypernatremia both is common. Hyponatremia is more common, and hyponatremia is primarily because of SIDH. So cerebral salt wasting syndrome is a rare disorder. SIDH is a more common disorder. Okay, and if SIDH is present, you know the management, because we'll be discussing that in the sodium talk. But make sure your patient is euvolemic. Don't restrict fluid for these patients, because if you restrict, the vasospasm chances increases. Okay. The blood pressure control also is a very important for this patient. Unless coiling or clipping has been done, the systolic blood pressure should be kept less than 160 millimeter of mercury. Okay, and because as the blood pressure increases in unsecured aneurysm, the chances of rebleed increases. So this, if systolic blood pressure remains high despite treatment, further lowering of the blood pressure should be considered. But mind you, you should always keep your CPP more than 70 millimeter of mercury. So ideally, the recommended is those patient has a poor grade SAH. Ideally, this patient should have ICP monitoring in place, and you should titrate your blood pressure according to ICP monitoring. If patient is otherwise stable, you have to follow the neurological status. By decreasing the blood pressure, if the neurological status deteriorates, then you need to increase the blood pressure. The thromboplastic, again, we know that for any condition in the brain where there is a bleeding, the thromboplastin is formed and can cause increased incidence of the DVT and pulmonary embolism. So in cases of deep vein thrombosis, prevention is indicated. We need to give a low molecular weight heparin, should be not earlier than 12 hours after surgical occlusion of aneurysm and immediately after coiling. So after coiling, you can immediately start, but if the aneurysm clipping has been done, we should wait at least for 12 hours. But pneumatic compression devices, and these they should always be in place. Okay, management of the seizure. Routine seizure prophylaxis is not required, but there are certain patients in which the incidence of seizure increases dramatically. If the thick subarachnoid clot is present, or is there any intracerebral hemorrhage is seen, or there is a delayed infarction, and the later on patient develops an infarct. And if there is an aneurysm in the middle cerebral artery, so these are the patients where the incidence of seizures are high, and as you know that seizures will cause increase in ICP and worsen the patient, so the patient should ideally undergo, these patients should receive seizure, anti-seizure prophylaxis. Routine seizure prophylaxis in all patients is not recommended, because in one of the major randomized controlled trial, those patients who receive phenytoin has a poor outcome. So, but this trial was not done with the newer antiepileptics, and many surgeons, neurosurgeons and neurologists feel that the newer drugs are safe and seizure can cause more problems. So ideally, all patients with SAH should receive the seizure prophylaxis. But jury is still not out on which patient should receive and which patient should. But there are such, these, if the patient has these risk factors, patient should receive seizure prophylaxis. Okay, so if the seizure, this was a guideline that was already told you. If the patient has cerebral edema and intractable hypertension, aneurysm, MCA, ideally these patients should receive it. The class 2B recommendation is there. Coming to the lot of drugs, research has been done in last 10 years. The magnesium sulfate, the statins, and many other trials. But magnesium sulfate has no role for the management of SAH, so it's not recommended. Okay, statins, the mechanism of action is that because of the induction of the nitric oxide, it causes vasodilatation. So it decreases the ICP, it decreases the rebleeding, and a lot of RCTs has been done. But most of the big randomized controlled trials have not shown any benefit with the statins. Smaller trials have shown some benefit. So the largest trial was a STASH, the multi-center randomized controlled trial, where they used simvastatin 40 milligram, and no short or long-term benefit of this drug was seen. But still many people give it because this drug is usually safe. So many neurologists or neurosurgeons, they give a statin. Coming to the vasospasm prevention, so we know that this is a level 1A indication. The nimodipine is the preferred drug. Right, and the other methods of vasospasm prevention is removal of blood clot at the time of aneurysm clipping and avoiding hypovolemia and hypertension. Okay, so why nimodipine is used? Nimodipine may improve outcome, but it has been proven with many randomized controlled trials now that that nimodipine prevents vasospasm and decreases mortality in these patients. The exact mechanism is not clear, but they say that it reduces the calcium-dependent excitotoxicity, it decreases platelet aggregation, and dilatation of the small arteries happens, and that causes vasodilatation. Right? That this is very important that this drug should be given orally or through the Ryle's tube, and the dose is 60 milligram 4th hourly, and it should be given minimum for 21 days. If the hypotension happens with this dose, so ideally you should first try to increase the interval, and then if it's not happening, then you can decrease the dose. So what are the secondary complications of day 1 and 3? In the first 72 hours, many of these patients rebleed actually. So the rebleeding and acute hydrocephalus is common between day 1 and 3, and the day 3 onwards, there is a possibility of the delayed cerebral ischemia. So the rebleeding usually presents an acute deterioration of the GCS, and the risk is highest in first 2 to 12 hours. The majority of the cases of the rebleeding happens within first 6 hours. Okay. The risk factors are longer time to aneurysm repair, higher Hunt and Hess on admission, initial loss of consciousness, previous sentinel headache, large aneurysm size, and high SPP. So all these are the risk factors are present. The possibility of rebleeding is extremely high. And mind you, the rebleeding carries a very high mortality, 70%. So how to minimize rebleeding? For that, the most important thing is we need to do an early repair of the aneurysm and control the blood pressure. So the early repair of the aneurysm is usually can be done with a surgical clipping or endovascular coiling. So as you know that this is our biggest randomized control trial, ISAT trial, which actually compared the endovascular coiling versus in clipping. And in that trial, they said that those patients who underwent an endovascular coiling, the mortality was lesser compared to those patients who underwent a clipping, surgical clipping. But there are certain, it also depends on the patient factor, because some patients who has a large aneurysm, very large, more than 8, or who has a significant intracerebral blood volume more than 50 ml, or the middle cerebral artery aneurysm, they ideally should undergo a clipping. And those patients whose age is more than 70 years, multiple comorbidities are present, patient has a WFN say 4 to 5 grade, these patients should ideally undergo a coiling, right? If there is a delay in definitive repair, so ideally the method is you have to repair it, but if there is a delay, a short course of antifibrinolytic agent can be given, the tranexamic acid or epsilon caprylic acid, any one of them can be given, but you should never keep it for more than 72 hours, because if you are using it for more than 72 hours, there's a possibility of the thrombosis and vasospasm. So ideally it should be used only within 72 hours. Okay, coming to other complications, hydrocephalus is a very common complication usually seen because of the presence of blood in the basal cistern. It can block the CSF drainage and can cause sudden acute rise in the acute hydrocephalus, leading to the delay in neurological recovery. And ideally, if you suspect any neurological patients, the first thing you need to do is scan the head urgently, and EVD should be placed, right? So vasospasm prevention we have already discussed. The next thing is delayed cerebral ischemia. So any delayed neurological deterioration, those patients, that means after 3 days, and which persists for more than 1 hour, for which you don't have any other cause, is called delayed cerebral ischemia, right? And usually present after 3 days, the peaks around 7 days. Okay, it presents as acute deterioration in consciousness, and the etiology is vasospasm, which is narrowing of the cerebral vessel. So how do you do that? The TCD is necessary for that monitoring, and nimodipine is used to prevent the DCI. But once the patient developed a delayed cerebral ischemia, nimodipine has no role. So any specific therapy, but before that, how do you monitor for the delayed cerebral ischemia? You should do ideally a daily TCD in these patients, right? And monitor the TCD daily. What we are going to see, MCA velocity more than 120 centimeters, suggestive that the velocity is increased. Possibly this patient has a vasospasm. Then you can also calculate the Lindegaard ratio, which is the ratio of velocity in the MCA divided by right ipsilateral internal carotid artery. So if the ratio is more than 6, that means this patient has a vasospasm. If it is less, that means it's secondary to hyperemia. So to differentiate between hyperemia and vasospasm, you can use the Lindegaard ratio. Another very most important is clinical examination. The ideally hourly neurological examination should be done, and at least 6 hourly NIHSS coding should be done. And if any one of them is positive, these patients should undergo a new CT scan, or if CT scan is suggestive of the of vasospasm, the patient should undergo a angiography. So before that, if you suspect this patient has a cerebral vasospasm and delayed cerebral ischemia, so the therapy which is used for this is called hemodynamic augmentation. Previously it was called triple H therapy, but we know that two components of this therapy doesn't work. Only hypertension works and other two components are actually detrimental for the patient. So the recommendation is induction of hypertension by vasopressors. You can use noradrenaline and dopa, any one of them. And try to keep euvolemia. Don't give fluid and keep the patient hypervolemic, because hypervolemia is associated with poor outcome. Hemodilution is again a component which has not been found useful in clinical studies. So the only component which works is hypertension, induced hypertension. Okay, there are a lot of other studies which has been done, endothelin receptor antagonist, phosphodiesterase inhibitor, but all these things have nodal act present in the management of subarachnoid involved hemorrhage. Okay, for intrathecal thrombolysis, the meta-analysis has shown benefit, but it requires more better randomized control trial. So what are the other therapies? The balloon angioplasty is the main treatment for cerebral vasospasm leading to delayed cerebral ischemia. So those patients who have a focal vasospasm, the angioplasty can be done, and this is mainly limited for the large arteries. But those patients who have a diffuse disease, for them this balloon angioplasty will not work, where we can use an intra-arterial administration of vasodilators like nicardipine, milrinone, papaverine, nimodipine and verapamil. So the take-home message is that urgent diagnosis is very important for these patients. We need to do the assess the severity, because the more the severe disease, the outcome is very poor. And the etiological workup is very important initially to manage, decide the management line. Early aneurysm repair is better, and anticipate a very turbulent course in first 2 to 3 days. Thank you.